Hello and welcome to another episode of the CG Garage. This is episode number 443, featuring Jonathan Rothbart. And you may be wondering, wait, hasn't Jonathan Rothbart been on the podcast not too long ago? You are correct. He has been on. And we did talk about the contributions that he had to John Wick Chapter 4. But he actually has an absolutely incredible past, which I didn't really catch on to the first time, not realizing who Jonathan was, and decided he needed his own episode to talk about his amazing contribution to the visual effects world. Jonathan, of course, was very interesting. He got interested in computer graphics from a screensaver. Can you believe that? That's kind of an interesting thing. He had a great, amazing career starting off in games, but then ended up at ILM and ended up starting his own company, the very well-renowned Orphanage, which is an absolutely incredible company. And so we talk about that. This does go into a very long podcast because it turns out that Jonathan has some incredible stories, and I just didn't want to stop recording because it was so great talking to him and to hear all the amazing things that he's done for the industry. So a really cool guy, really nice guy, extremely humble and shy person as well, but I was really glad he was able to open up for all of this stuff and be able to give us a little bit of history that I guess is so important for us to know about, and I'm really happy that he was able to do that. So thank you, Jonathan, for being on and for having this incredible interview with you. All right, we do have a couple of interview updates to give you. I think I mentioned Vantage 2 is out. It is a really, really important package. I've actually sort of been going on a world tour talking about Vantage 2. Not that necessarily that I need to. I'm not necessarily a salesperson. But I am very, very excited about the stuff that's going on, real-time ray tracing. And this is something that's happening, especially influencing the world of virtual production. And so this is really, really cool. So if you want to know more about Vantage 2, just go to chaos.com and learn more about it, what's going on there. But if you want to know more about events that are happening that I will be attending, just go to chaos.com/events. The first one I want to mention is going to come up very soon, and that is September 20th through the 23rd. I'm going to be at THU Japan, which I'm very excited about. As you guys know, I go to a lot of THU events. I go to almost every single one. This one happens to be in Japan, which I am very excited about. I have never been to Japan. Actually, I have never been to Asia. Yes, believe it or not, I haven't actually been able to make it to that side of the world yet. And I'm very, very excited about my first trip to Japan and to see what THU is going to do there. So go ahead and check that out. I will also be at the View Conference, another thing that it's the first time I've ever attended a View Conference. I'm very excited about that. That, of course, is happening at Turin, Italy, and that is going to be October 15th through the 20th. So I'll be recording some podcasts over there, or actually both of these places I'll be recording podcasts. So lots of great stuff to report there. In other events, also, I want to make sure that you guys know Rhino World is happening in Barcelona on October 17th through the 19th. So you guys are interested in that, you should go check it out as well. Again, all of these things are listed at chaos.com/events. Again, that is chaos.com/events. Now, if you guys want to know more about the actual podcast, of course, you can just go to our podcast page. Always welcome to go there. That is chaos.com/CG Garage. If you'd like to know more about us on social, you can always follow us on Facebook, facebook.com/CG Garage Podcast. If you'd like to watch these podcasts, always recommend that. They were available on YouTube. Just follow our YouTube, youtube.com/Chaos Group TV. Also, please don't stop. Don't let it stop, because we've been getting some amazing recommendations. If you'd like to recommend podcasts or have comments about podcasts or questions or anything else, you can always email us. labs@chaos.com is where you can do that. Again, that is labs@chaos.com. But for now, please enjoy episode number 443 with Jonathan Rothbart.
Welcome to another CG Garage, where the Chaos Group talks. You'll know it's over when the last bucket drops. We're gonna fire off rays in high dynamic range. We know that ambient occlusion is passé. Global illumination won't lead you astray. And while image-based lighting is really swell, you need to make sure everything has Fresnel.
All right, Jonathan. So last time that we met each other, we were talking about John Wick 4. By the way, congratulations. An amazing film. I loved it, and a lot of amazing work. But we never really got a chance to go in depth into some of your background, which I think is fascinating. I would love to sort of talk about some of that. Can you, first of all, Tell us what got you interested in filmmaking, computer graphics? Like what was your origin story?
That's funny. Well, it was way back when in college, in '92, and I was working for a printer, and he had this old Apple. It was like a 2E or something like that, just an old Apple computer. And as a screensaver, he had this 3D vase that was just rotating on his computer.
Right.
And at the time, I just never seen anything like that before, and I just thought it was the coolest thing I ever seen, that you could just have it floating on the machine. So then I became fascinated with computer graphics at that point. I was an English major at the time, and then I just went down to the Media Arts Center in at the school, and just started teaching myself on an old Amiga, the software packages that they had at the time.
Sure.
And from doing that, I was able to get a few gigs doing some stuff for the university, like some fly-throughs and some commercial work, which was really fun. And
You were an English major, so how did you do you just do it on the side, or?
Yeah, I just did it at night. So I would go in there around 11 at night, and I'd do it till about 3 in the morning, and just kind of work on it on my own all through the night. And then I would go home on my own. They would let me in there. So it was just me and the computers and nobody else at the time, Not that there were a lot of computers down there or anything. They weren't very common at the time.
Sure.
So, yeah, I think they had 2 of them that they were super excited about. And then, so I was just fascinated, loved it. And after I graduated from college in '92, I then started working for an advertising agency up in Phoenix. I was going to school at U of A in Tucson, and then I moved back up to Phoenix.
Right.
And I lived at home and worked, bartended at night, and then worked for free, actually doing computer graphics for an advertising agency for between 6 months to a year of doing that.
And what were you doing? What kind of graphics were you doing for them at that time?
It was mostly titles, and again, a lot of line design and kind of basic graphics. We worked on a PC. There weren't a lot of programs out there yet to do that kind of work, so you couldn't get too fancy in terms of what you were doing. Because I was trying to learn 3D, I was trying to incorporate as much 3D as I could into whatever we were doing.
Sure.
But again, it was slow going. It was one machine, you rendered on your machine, and just having blocks go across the screen with some images on them took, good couple hours to render that baby out. So
yeah. And what were you using if you're on a PC? Were you using Macs or?
Yeah, I was in 3D Studio Max.
Oh, actually 92 was before Max. It was probably in DOS, right?
Oh, yeah, yes, for sure. And
right.
Funny enough, when I was in high school, and I actually started learning programming in DOS just for whatever reason, and so I was comfortable around computers. I was always comfortable around computers.
Right.
I was the kid in school where I had in my dorm, I had a word processor. It wasn't even a computer. It was just a word. I was the only guy who had it, but it was a word processor, so I could write on it. And I loved it just because it actually would, you could, delete and replace. And so you could actually work on something and not have it, not like on a typewriter where you had to go back and white it out and then rewrite it. But yeah, I was like the only kid I knew who had a word processor at the time. So yeah. it was kind of it was definitely the nascent early stages of computer graphics for sure.
Right.
And then from the advertising agency, one of the guys who worked there ended up moving on to a gaming company that was also in Phoenix, and he mentioned that, hey, they need more people. So I went and interviewed over there, and then got a job working at the gaming company. At first, all I was doing was more of the graphic stuff, and I actually did a lot of work in Photoshop, animating effects in Photoshop, where you would just literally, do the effect on a frame, and then save it out, and then you would move the effect a little further, and then save it out, move the effect a little further, and then save it out, and you did it all in Photoshop as opposed to anything that you could actually animate through.
Yeah, that's like stop motion almost, right?
Pretty much. It really was. It's because there just wasn't like any kind of a lighting effects or warp effects or any of the stuff we were doing in the games. They just didn't have anything that created that look. So
Right.
I would just figure out how to come up with a look in Photoshop and then figure out how to, change the dials to animate it over a series of images.
Yeah. And this was before After Effects, right? So it's
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. It wasn't until I got to ILM that I got introduced to After Effects.
Right.
Which was amazing. But so I did that for about a year, and then about 6 months in, I started animating in 3D for the game, and that's when I started doing animation, character animation.
Yeah,
in the games, which was super fun, and I was really into it. And it was one of those things where you could just put on your headphones, and I just had Metallica blaring, and you just go and just crank all night long, just animating and just zone out the whole world and just be into your animation. It was good times.
What were you animating? So what was this game?
It was called The Hive, and it was a game on rails. And even back then, again, the graphics weren't that amazing because we were, it was still the basic 3D Studio Max. There wasn't that many bells and whistles to it yet. It wasn't even Max yet. It was 3D Studio Max.
Yeah.
And but they had some good rigging setups, and I just loved animating. I just loved making things come to life and see things in motion. I was just fascinated with it, and just like I said, you get in there and start cranking on it, and just I would lose myself to the world. And we would work like 18 hours a day, but you didn't even think about it because you're just kind of in it and learning the whole time, and it was fun.
Wow. Well, that's cool.
Yeah.
I mean, that's right. So your roots really sort of started into the gaming world, but it's funny that you were inspired by a OpenGL screensaver.
Yeah, I know. Isn't it silly? It's so funny. You think of it now, it's just the silliest thing, and it was just crazy because, I mean, it had nothing to do with it. It just literally, I had to print something out for the guy who was doing the printing, and it was just, I went to his computer, it was on it. And that was kind of my first memory of seeing 3D graphics, really. I mean, it was being done in film a little bit, obviously, by ILM, but that felt so big and out there that it was an untouchable thing. Plus, they were still doing so much with models and everything else. Jurassic Park hadn't happened yet.
Yep.
So it really felt like this faraway place. And then, but as a kid, I was always fascinated with sci-fi and movies and games. It was just, I was one of those kids who loved all that. And I would, go see, so, I was a kid who saw Indiana Jones probably 30 times in the theater, or Star Wars or whatever. I remember I cut class when I was a kid to go see, I bought, me and my friends, I rode my bike to the theater, bought my friends and I 4 tickets, and then we all went and saw Empire Strikes Back that night. But I skipped school to go get the tickets to make sure we could get in. So I was just, I loved movies and would see just about anything I could watch at the time.
And did you when you were first looking at like that screensaver or sort of thinking about doing graphics on the Media Lab, were you thinking about the film industry, or were you just thinking about the graphics at that point?
Just the graphics, and I just wanted to understand it, and I just see how to do it and see if I was interested in it.
Right.
Because I remember as an English major, which is, I loved being an English major, and I loved that field as far as learning in college, but it teaches you how to communicate and work well with people and understand the world and all that sort of stuff. But, my mom was just frantically trying to find me a job based off of that. So I was constantly getting ads and whatnot from her on doing copy editing or something like that. But none of it really appealed to me. So I was just kind of searching, and I was trying out this computer graphics thing, and she was nervous. But I just stuck with it. And then I had a friend who was a fraternity brother when I was in college, named David Dezoritz, who had already started working at ILM in the art department, which I hadn't even known he was there at the time. And then, we had talked at one point, and I mentioned to him that I was interested in the field. And it was really when I saw, sorry, I'm jumping around. It was when
No,
I
go ahead.
saw my current wife, who was my girlfriend at the time. She was going to law school in Chicago, so I'd gone and visited her in Chicago. We decided to go see Jurassic Park one night in the theater. There was this big theater in Chicago, and once I saw that, I was like, "That's it. This is the only thing I ever want to do is work on movies and do computer graphics in movies." Once I saw Jurassic Park,
And
so
it's funny you made that connection. It's like, oh, that screensaver and my love of movies comes together right here. Right?
yeah, it really was. It was really great, and so and then not too long afterwards, David Dezoritz contacted me because we had talked about at one point that I was interested in, and because he was moving on to go work for George Lucas to do episode 1. So he was leaving the art department, and he basically started the very early stages of previz at ILM. And then he was doing it for maybe a year. And then so he was going to leave to go start a previz department for episode 1, and called me and asked me if I was interested, which of course I was. So he said, all right. And I he connected with me with Mark Moore, who was running the art department at the time. And Mark was like, great, come in. It was like a Monday in a week or something like that. So then I started putting together a reel of my work over the next week, and I would do that between the hours of like 2 and 5 a.m. every night. And we were using these huge platters to save out all of the data, because they needed to be fast enough, which there wasn't a lot fast enough to save it out. So I would have to render and then save it out, and you'd build a reel, and the reel was on a VHS tape. And so, and then you had to cut it together on the and then put it on to music on the VHS tape, which was interesting. And then I met with Mark, and he told me, "Great, why don't you? We love you." And they wanted me to start in a week on Monday, which I was like, absolutely. And he's like, "Great, you'll be working on the Mac," and which I had never touched before, had no idea. And we'll have you start on Monday, which was all amazing. I'd flown up to San Francisco just for this interview. And
were you still technically living in Phoenix at the time, or
I was living in Phoenix. I hadn't even told my boss at the gaming company that any of this was going on at the time. It wasn't really that kind of company. And so then I got back, and then I told my boss, "Look, I'm leaving in a week on Monday. Sorry for the short notice, but I'm going to ILM and work on movies." And his response was, "That seems like the wrong decision. You could stay here and do games." I'm like, "I'll see you later." So, so then I had to pack up all my stuff, and I moved to San Francisco, and I stayed at David's place, which we eventually got a place together for the first couple weeks while I was there, and just spent all my time trying to learn how to use a Mac computer. And I worked on Electric Image and Photoshop, and then shortly afterwards, shortly afterwards is when I started. I got introduced to After Effects, which was COSA at the time. Adobe hadn't bought it yet, and I was hanging out with the matte painting team. It was Paul Houston and Yusei and Eric and Chavan, and then Eric basically was the one who taught me After Effects. And the first thing I had to do was I was working on some commercial, and they wanted an Indiana Jones type map fly through thing.
Yeah.
So that was So that was the first thing I ever did in After Effects, was figure out how to get a map in there and do the fly and have the line go and the dot and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, like the airplane flying in the dot, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So that was the first thing I ever did in After Effects. And then I was, pretty much the previz department for all of ILM. So I would work on every show we had just about at ILM at the time, which was so fun because I worked on so many different projects and got to deal, I was working with Dennis Muir, and I was working with John Knoll, and I was working with Eric Barba. I mean, it was all great. It was great.
Right.
I just had so many opportunities, and you learn so much from those guys. I mean, it was an incredible experience because you can't. It's hard to even put into words how much you learn from just being around those guys and them giving you comments and you working. It really set the tone for how I kind of still follow my career and how I work.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that was amazing. And John in particular, John Knoll, was really into electric image and After Effects once, and of course Photoshop.
Can you explain it? Because I don't think a lot of people know what electric image is. Can you give it a little bit?
Yeah.
Because it's kind of a little bit of ancient history.
It's old. Yeah. Electric image was a 3D application for After Effects, or for the Mac. It was like the only one I think you could use on the Mac at the time. And it was actually pretty amazing. It was doing stuff that you really couldn't do on a PC at the time.
Right.
And especially when it came to shaders, it was really cool that it had a lot of visual feedback on shaders that you didn't necessarily have in a lot of other applications. Because, at ILM, everybody was on Linux or Unix, and they were using in-house software. And so when people wrote shaders at ILM at the time, they were writing it in code, and you couldn't really even see what it was going to look like until after the render was done.
Right.
Where in electric image, I remember it was so cool because we had a ball, right?
Right.
We had a little ball, and you could dial the shader, and you'd see the feedback on the ball, so you just knew what you were going to get from the ball. And at the time, you're like, "This is so cool,"
Right.
Feedback.
Right.
And then it was the worst part was rendering in After Effects, which got way worse later on when I started doing real graphics, real shots in After Effects, just because it was so slow. And if you had to make an adjustment, literally you would just sit there and stare at the screen with your eyes wide open, not blinking, which is what eventually destroyed my eyes, just waiting because there was no update bar or anything like that. So you just had to wait, and then it would change. And if you missed it for a second, you missed the change. And there was no going back and seeing what it was like before or anything like that in the beginning stage of it. So you just had to sit there and stare at the computer as hard as you could for as long as it took. It was painful.
Yeah.
But cool stuff. And so I was doing all the previous work, and I was working on some side project that we were doing, and I was working out with John Knoll because we were doing. I was doing this little intro for some tech for a tech conference.
Okay.
And it was it started with the moon, and it was going to be this little probe, this the Sputnik it goes by the moon and comes back to Earth, and then it projects down a big image in front of over North America and for the moon. For the show was the intro, and John Knoll, if anybody knows he just is fascinated by the moon and moon landing. And so he really was interested in it. So he helped me out a lot in doing that, which in turn I learned a lot while doing it. And then when I started that, John became excited about it. And while we were doing the re-release for Star Wars, the original, I guess 4, and what he did was he did a shot of an X-wing fighting at the Death Star, and George thought it was amazing because John basically just did it in his kitchen or dining room table or wherever John works at home. So from that, John wanted to create a small group of artists within ILM, which was going to be this little boutique in ILM, where the idea would be one artist, one shot. So instead of having the whole pipeline, we were going to be able to do a single shot. We were modeling in Form Z, and animating and lighting and electric image, and then we were compositing in After Effects, and then you did all your textures in Photoshop. So
This is the beginning of the generalist pipeline that they had there, right?
Yes, it was the birth of generalist pipeline for sure.
Which is very contrary to the way things operated back then. Everyone had one task, one artist, right?
In every little part of it,
right?
And even down to roto, I was doing all my own roto. We had to do everything,
right?
So, it was super. So it was myself, and then Matt Hendershot, and our team was led by Stu Maschwitz, who later I became partners with the Orphanage, and then John Knoll was kind of our figurehead for the group, and we were prepping ourselves to work on episode 1, but before that, we actually worked on Star Trek because that was John Knoll's show. So he asked us to do, and it was fun for me because before we started on Star Trek, before I had switched over, I was doing all the previs for all of the spaceship work on Star Trek at the time. So it was super cool for me because I was creating all these shots for Star Trek, which I just thought was awesome.
Right.
And then I moved over. I started doing finishing shots for it, which was really cool. And that's when we really started pushing all of those tools to their limits. And a big part of making that happen was Stu, who is just a brilliant guy with software, and we were very close with After Effects and really trying to work with After Effects to build tools so that we could actually do full shots for film, because we had to figure out a way to work with EXRs or Cineon files at the time. Cineon files. Yeah, Cineon files at the time. So, the software wasn't designed to handle that color space. So we had to come up with a system to work in that color space, in log color space, and then render out all of our files to be able to be utilized in log space, which then we converted in After Effects. But it was all very, we were figuring out everything as we went, for sure.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but the legendary story is that you guys made the first pod race. Like, that was one of your big sequences. Is that correct?
No, that is not correct. That is not correct. Actually, the pod race was designed by David and his team up north, but we did all the space battle work.
The space battle work, okay.
Yeah, the rules for us were we couldn't do any characters. The tools just couldn't handle character work. Okay. So we had to do all of our work was either hard surface or environment.
Oh, okay.
Later, and we became very close to the matte department because we ended up doing a lot of 3D work that then we would project the matte work that the matte guys were painting onto the 3D and then render it out. So we ended up becoming very close to the matte part. It was a really cool time because the art department was back at ILM when we were at the Kerner days. They were all in separate buildings, and we were in this building called G Building. They all numbers or letters. And G Building consisted of the art department, the model department, ultimately the matte department, and then Rebel Mac, which we were affectionately known as. And then so it was just the greatest thing because I had all these incredible matte painters around me. Being in the art department was also incredible. I was working with George Hull and Guy Dias and Scott Lebrecht and just all these brilliant artists. And then while we'd have renders going, I would wander back to the model shop and ask if I could paint on some models while I was back there.
That's amazing.
So I just got to be around all of it. And
what were the matte paint? Were they matte painting in Photoshop at the time, or were they still doing traditional painting?
They were matte painting in Photoshop.
Okay.
When I first got to ILM in the art department, the first thing I was tasked with doing was kind of teaching the artists to switch from working on paper to working on the computer. So I was teaching them all. My biggest claim to fame, I like to say, is that I was teaching George Hull how to use Photoshop. So at first it was funny. The artists, they would still do everything on paper. Then they would scan it
Right.
on a flatbed scanner, and then they would start working on their drawn work on top. They would start doing touch-ups digitally on top of it, and then eventually, obviously, the paper went away.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the map painters all had, even when I got there at ILM, the map painters were already working in Photoshop. So they were masters in Photoshop when I already got there. So I'd go there to ask for them or John Knoll for Photoshop advice,
Yeah.
And then Eric Chauvin, like I said, was the first one who taught me After Effects. And once I seen that, I just thought it was now you can do anything. But so yeah, so when we started Romac, we started doing the Star Trek shots, which was so cool because when I was doing the previs for it, it never occurred to me that I would actually be doing a final shot for it. So to jump from previs to final shot in working, and all of our work had to still, we would go to dailies just like everybody else, and you're sitting in what was called C theater, which is big theater, and you have the entire crew in there, and John sitting in the front with his laser pointer giving comments on all the shots, and you're always just, dailies was the most stressful thing. You're nervous as hell going into dailies,
right,
at LM, because everybody's looking at it, and then once John starts commenting and things, other people start bringing it up, and you're just like, your head's in your hand, you're just like, oh my god, my shot sucks.
Right.
But and and I was just obsessive about it. I wanted my shot to be perfect every time out, so I just slept under my desk, and I would just stay there and let After Effects render, and if something mixed, I'd go back and do it again, and then render it, and if something missed, I would go back and do it again, and I would be there all night before I was submitting to dailies, just because I wanted to make sure that whatever I got in there was the best it could possibly be.
Right.
But yeah, so that was really amazing, because we were putting our electric image After Effects shots right next to all the high end, Unix Linux shots that they were using at ILM. So it was really cool time for sure. And then after that, we actually went on and did all the egg screens for Men in Black. So
right,
which was super fun, because it kind of got me back to my graphics roots a little bit.
Right.
So I had a ball with that, and then it was cool because we were also working with the art department, where David Nakabayashi, who now runs the ILM art department, he was designing all the look of stills of all the looks that we're going to do in the eggs, and then we had to make everything move and animate. That was a lot of fun. That was really cool. One story, I got a lot of shit for it, because like I said, in dailies, it's just nerve-wracking, because everybody's in there, and everybody's watching, and you're getting comments. And I had rendered one out, and After Effects used to do this fucking thing where if it lost the footage, it just put color bars in place of it, right?
Yes.
So you would just end up with these color bars. And I was doing this one egg shot where it was supposed to be all these different guys are aliens, and it was like Sylvester Stallone, and it was Arnold Schwarzenegger, and then it was I forget the guy who does the news, the weather, but Al Roker, and so I was just doing all these people that Tony Robbins, but so they were all supposed to be in there, and they were basically supposed to be aliens, and so I rendered the shot, and everything was looking fine, and then I actually went home that night. And when it showed up for dailies the next day, somehow midway through the shot, it lost the connection to all of the different footage. So when my dailies came up, it showed color bars in everything in my dailies. And to this day, I still take shit from definitely Stu Maschwitz about rendering color bars for dailies. But yeah, so it was. Yep. It was yeah, there was a lot of pitfalls, and it was fun, because you just never knew what you were going to get when you were doing it, and you were just so focused and in it, and it was just such a new world, and ILM was such a cool place at the time, where just everybody was kind of in it to win it together, and we had this, by that time our group was expanding, and we had then taken on 3 new artists at time, which was I think Craig Lynn, Coley Wirtz, and Shadi Almasazadi. And those guys are all have gone on to do full careers in our industry. But yeah, so Billy Brooks was the other one. But yeah, so we'd expanded a bit, and but we were kind of our literal unit in G building, so we were just having a blast because it was just us kind of at times against all of ILM in some ways, because a lot of there were certainly people at ILM who didn't love what we were doing because it was against the nature of what was happening at ILM, and at the same time it was a little harder for production because they couldn't track us in the same way that they were tracking the rest of their show.
Right.
And the only way to track us was just to come to us and say, well, how long do you think? We were like, well, like,
Right.
And that's when everybody started calling us Rebel Mac. And so we took it to heart a little bit. So we would just kind of do our own thing and just say, well, it all looks great. We give you guys great shots. You'll get them when you get them, and we'll be on time. Don't worry, and we'll deliver. And so, and because nobody else was relying on us, and we weren't relying on anybody else because we were doing all of our own shots, we could just kind of get away with it.
Right.
Yeah. So it was, and that was certainly, there were definitely the guys in our group. Such as myself and Billy and Matt, we all kind of a little anti-authority anyway. So, so we were.
They were used to anti-authority at that point. I got Spaz working there.
Certainly, yes, for sure. No, there was definitely a tradition of that at ILM, no problem.
Right.
But we certainly embodied it within our group, no doubt about it.
Right.
Spaz definitely beat us to the punch when it comes to anti-authority at ILM. And then we started working on Star Wars Episode 1, and that was just an amazing time. We were doing space battle work, which I was always in love with the space battle in the films. So to me, it was just the most incredible thing. Oh, going back, I will say that I think about it, the first thing I ever did for ILM for previz was George Hull was doing a new painting for Cloud City, and we were going to do the Millennium Falcon, doing an extra shot on Empire of the Millennium Falcon flying through Cloud City. And so I got to design how the ship was going to fly through Cloud City, as how the Falcon was going to fly through Cloud City, and I was working with George on it and whatnot. But that was just incredible. I walk in ILM, and they're like, okay, the first thing you need to do is get the Millennium Falcon into your system and build a Cloud City that can be flown through with the Millennium Falcon. And I was okay. I'm in.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was awesome. And so then I started doing actual space battle shots, and that was cool because we were animating the Naboo Starfighter and all the other ships, and just having an amazing time with it. And again, back to sleeping under your desk and working 18 hours and 19 hours a day and all that stuff to get the shots done, because that was a labor of love like nothing else, where we were all working so hard to do just the best version of that movie we possibly can,
right?
And having fun with it. And we were all really proud of the work we did. I didn't love the movie, but we were all really proud of the work we did. But yeah, so we were working on that, and that was a big part. And then I'll tell you one other little story. I got in big trouble during that time because I had painted the Naboo Starfighter for us to use in our group. There was another version of it that they were using in CG, but for our group, I became pretty good at texture map work and paint work. Coley Wirtz was an incredible modeler, so he did a lot of the model work. And so we got segmented a little bit in that way, but we could all still use all the tools that would fix up our own stuff and whatnot. But when I was doing the Naboo Starfighter, I thought it'd be cool. I did, on the side of the ship, they have the call sign for all the pilots. So there was the straight up one that was that we had from CG that I used, but then I actually did one for each artist in our group. So I was like, well, just put it on there for each time you use it, and you'll have your own little name on the Naboo Starfighter as it flies by. And they're just flying by. You can't ever see it. Nobody would ever see it in there.
Sure.
And for me, the base one, I just, for fun, I put JBart as everybody called me at ILM JBart because that was just my login for email. But when I was in the art department doing previz, I was working on so many shows. And back then at the island, they had a paging system. That's how they got a hold of you, the paging system. Right. So I had all these coordinators who were paging me constantly all day long. So it was always like, JBart, call 2302, JBart, call 484. Right. And so it was just, and people walk around like, who is this guy? So for fun, I just put JBart is the man on the side of the ship in the little call sign. It was tiny. And it was all fine. Nothing happened. It was all good. We did the movie. It was great. But then marketing took my files, apparently, to do their posters, and they actually use it on the model box that they made for the model, the Naboo Starfighter. And they didn't notice it on the model box necessarily, but then when they did a 30-foot poster of the Naboo Starfighter profile, and that's when you saw on the side, JBart is the man. It's plain as day. And that's when I got in trouble. So marketing was definitely really angry with me, and ILM was really angry with me. And so, and Stu was awesome. He was trying to protect me on it. And eventually it got to George, and ILM wanted to fire me and for doing it. And George, and to his credit, it's like, it is a tradition at ILM to put names and things. And so he said, no, you're not going to fire him. And yeah, it was great. It was great. And so I ended up not getting fired at ILM.
I have seen many textures with many inappropriate things. way less appropriate than your name is awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was the models and the posters that really pissed them off.
Yeah.
But yeah, and it was funny because when we were in the meeting with the execs and Stu was there, and they're like, is anyone else in your team done anything else that we have to know about?
Right.
And I was like, I don't know, nobody, I don't know. And Stu was like, no. But it turned out what Stu had done was, when one of the big donut chips explodes, all the lights go out, and for one frame, the last lights spell out Stu. So, and then he also fessed up to the fact that in Star Trek, because Stu always wore Converse, that two different colored Converse, that there's a Converse flying around fighting in Star Trek in the background.
Right.
But yeah, so we'd all been doing it all. It was just a funny moment at ILM.
Yep. I have a similar story to you. I was working on Day After Tomorrow, which I know you worked on that one as well. But we were working on a building, one of the Hollywood buildings in the movie, where the reporter gets hit by a billboard. And so the billboard was supposed to be Angeline, or that's what ended up in the movie. But we were waiting for permission for a long time. So we just put up a temporary poster up there of like what's on the billboard. And as a joke, I was taking reference pictures because I was building all the billboards. I took a picture of one of those things that says "accident at work," like call 1-800-lawyer. But then I put my own face as the lawyer face as a joke, because I thought, anyway, why not? Because it's temporary, it's not going to work, and whoever. And so everyone's laughing about it, and then it's like, oh well, eventually we're going to just replace it with Angelina. It's like, great. But apparently the shot guys used that same poster on all the cabs in New York.
Oh, really?
So the cabs had him on the thing. So I am still, you can't see it, but it's there somewhere.
That's so funny.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. That's awesome.
Yeah.
It's a great tradition. I love it.
Yeah.
I've even carried it all the way through career on Deadpool. One of my favorite ones is on Deadpool.
Yeah.
On the fight that happens on the overpass.
Yes.
The exit street is Parker because that's my daughter's name.
Right.
And so I put Parker on the exit. It was like Parker Avenue or something like that.
Right.
And it was really funny. And I had first put it. We had done a little sizzle reel for Comic-Con. I think it was Comic-Con for Deadpool, and Tim Miller, the director, went out and presented it.
Yeah.
And in it, just for fun, I originally put Miller Avenue, and then online everybody saw it and then was giving Tim shit about it, saying, you know, how arrogant he puts his own name in the movie and everything like that. And he had no idea.
Right.
So he came back to me. He's like, "What are you doing to me? You've got to take that off there." I'm like, okay, I'm so sorry. It was just funny. So then I put Parker on there.
Yep.
But of course, everybody looks at every frame all the time in those movies.
Yep.
And then you see online all these theories about Spider-Man's going to be in the next Deadpool because there was Parker on the sign on the road. And it was funny because really it was just my daughter.
That's a great story.
Yeah, it was funny.
Awesome.
Yeah, but anyway, so that was back at ILM,
right?
And then after episode 1, I had really started getting close to my friend and future business partner Scott Stuart,
mm-hmm.
and I was starting to do a lot of side jobs of just, you know, little graphics stuff for, you know, just side gigs, mm-hmm. And we started doing it, and I started doing it, and then I started doing some more, and then it started getting to the point where I was hiring people. I was hiring people to actually do the work and just supervising because it was too much work and I couldn't do it, and I was still working at ILM at the time too, so then I got married and left to go on my honeymoon and all that. And I came back and worked on Sleepy Hollow because I really wanted to work with Jimmy Mitchell, who I just think is amazing, and just an amazing guy and his incredible talent. So I wanted to work on that show with him. So I stayed and worked doing a couple shots for Sleepy Hollow. And then after that, it's so much other work going on that we started the Orphanage. Mm-hmm. Myself and Scott Stuart started it, and then Stu Mashowitz came on a little later. But what happened was I was doing, at the time, Scott had already left ILM and was evangelizing for Puffin Design, which was making God, I can't think of the name. Scott Squire's rotoscope tool.
Right.
So it's rotoscoping. And then, so they were going to do a show in Amsterdam, and asked me if I wanted to come and work and show it at a booth in Amsterdam, which was like, of course. So I did that, and we left, and that's when Scott and I got really close, and we decided, you know what, we could just do all this work and do it ourselves. So it was shortly after that I finished Sleepy Hollow, and then I left ILM and we started the Orphanage.
Wow.
And we ended up, the first work we did was actually some work for ILM commercials, and then we worked on Mission to Mars. Jackie Lopez, who had been at ILM, who was a producer there, left ILM. I think she's back, something to do with Lucas now. But and then so she had hired us to do roto paint for Mission to Mars, and they were these ugly, brutal shots, just brutal shots. It was, they're supposed to be in 0G, and they're floating all around, and the cables they gave, the room spinning, and the cables they gave them were flying around all over the place, and the lights were flashing, so no frames was. It was brutal roto work, just brutal.
Right.
And the tools were, you know, early back then, so it was hard. But and you had to load all your shots onto exabyte tape, and then turn in an exabyte tape is how you got your shots out.
Wow.
And we were just working in this little office. It was funny. We were sharing it with the Res magazine guys, and which
Remember
is
Res
old.
magazine? Wow.
Yes, old. Oh, it's all old school.
Yeah,
It's
man.
all old school.
Yeah.
And yeah, because this was in 2000 now.
Yeah.
2001, and so we were sharing this office in San Francisco. There's this building called the International Center, and it was just all these different groups were in this building. So while we were working, there was an Olympic swimming pool at the bottom, and then outside on the stoop where all these pigeons were hanging out and just crapping on our stoop all the time, and it was just tiny little space. And then and we were at the top, so it was hot as hell. Or not the top, because one floor above us was a dance studio. So while we were trying to work to get stuff done, it smelled like a combination of chlorine and whatever smell the bird poop was giving us.
Right.
It was hot as hell, and then above us they were dancing all the time, just pounding on the ground on our ceiling all the time. It was just the craziest scenario to try and get work. So we would just put our headphones on and just crank music as loud as you could while you're trying to work, because you just couldn't focus on it. Yeah, it was pretty funny. And then so that at the time it was just Scott and I working, and then as we needed more work, we hired Kevin Bailey and Ryan Tudhope, who are our first two artists who were working with David Wazortz prior.
Yep.
Up at on episode 1,
right?
And they were so young when we hired them that we had to buy them beer. They couldn't even buy their own beer, so we'd have to go buy beer from them and bring back to the office so they could have beer that night. And so they affectionately became known as the Kids,
right?
Yeah. So and then that's when we got an office in the Presidio. So we had moved to the Presidio, and ILM was still at Kerner at the time,
right?
And we had this office in this. It was one room, and we were all in it in the Presidio. And eventually, we expanded to be 150 people, and took over a mass of this building, and just kept on moving other people out and taking more and more space up in the Presidio.
Wow.
Which was so cool to work in the Presidio. I mean, it was so cool to work there, although it was also hard because there's tons of rules working in the Presidio,
mm-hmm.
and you're working in these old military buildings that aren't wired, or we had to do a huge deal just to get us fiber to our building so we could actually get a fast enough internet connection to work, and then routing the whole place. And there was definitely days of building desks, building chairs, building computers, running cable and everything else. It was super fun.
Right. Yeah.
And when we originally started the Orphanage, the concept was it was both going to be a production company, and then we were using visual effects to finance our short films we were making at the time.
Okay.
And we had made a series of short films with some really great filmmakers, and then so we were trying to do that, but also the visual effects side, we were using that, like I said, just to kind of finance all that work. And while we were making those films, Stu Maschwitz had built this tool which he called Magic Bullet, because at the time people were starting to shoot digitally, but it was all on like Sony hand cams and Sony cameras and things like that, and everything was shot at 35 frames per second. So Stu had built this tool to convert 30 frame interlaced to 24 progressive.
Right.
And so we had to run the whole everything we shot. We had to run through this tool, and to make it look like progressive at 24 frames. And in addition to that, we had built in a suite of look tools to go with it.
Yep.
And then with that, we got hired by a production company to do called Indigent, to do 10 films with big filmmakers to shoot digitally. So, and then they hired us to convert them all to 24p, and then we did all the look suite work to them as well. So we got to do basically all the DI work and then convert it. So we thought it was really cool, and we were the technical support for making those movies, because at the time I don't know anybody who knew how to do that stuff better than we did, because we were just so deep in it, and because we were building the conversion tool, and then we started selling that, Magic Bullet, which ultimately died out when people as a conversion tool, because they started making cameras at 24p, but the look suite has lived on even till today in Stu's. Um, but yeah, so that's when we really started to do a lot more film production work. But even as that was all still going on, we still were working on visual effects as a way to pay for it, because there was really no money. Not that there was huge money in visual effects, but there was also not a lot of money in what we were doing, because it was so new. We didn't even know how to price it,
Right.
Not to mention, these were small productions. Nobody was going to pay us a lot of money to do it.
Sure.
Um, uh, but yeah, so that was kind of the early days of the Orphanage, and what we were working on. And then things just kind of, we were just, but we had a very heavy ILM mentality, as our goal was always, it has to be as good as whatever we did at ILM. Can't be anything less than that. So we put that level of expectation in anything we did in the Orphanage. So like any small company, we ended up getting bigger projects and bigger projects and bigger projects. Our first really big show was Hellboy.
Right.
That was our first. We had 300 shots in Hellboy, and
what were the sequences you were working on? I just watched it today or 2 days ago.
All right.
Yeah.
That's funny. That's funny. We did the whole underground scene where he's underground in that big environment.
Yes.
Underground. So we got to both design that and then build the environment for that and do all the shots in there. And that was super cool. We had, at the time, we had Mike Fangrazio, who's a brilliant artist. Him and Brian Flora and a bunch of other guys, but they were basically designing that environment. And then at the same time, we were doing the shots where the Liz Fire work.
Oh, right.
Yeah, which was super cool, because this was my first time I actually got to supervise practical shoot, where we did, because for the fire, we actually, when she blows fire, blows through a hallway and blows everything up, we actually shot that in a stage, and we had built a model of the set, but we had blackened it all and then tilted it vertically, and then shot the flames coming up at us and then other flame elements and whatnot, and then composite that into that scene. So that was my first chance to really oversee practical shooting for on a stage, which was really cool.
Yeah, with fire.
Yeah, big fire. And then so we did all the Liz stuff, and when the Ragnarok sky opens up and all that, we did that work.
Right.
And then the one character shot that we did was the birth of Ed, the creature with all the tentacles.
Mm-hmm.
LF-19 was the shot, and the reason I know the name is because that was one of the most painful, most difficult shots I think I've ever had to do, because we just didn't have the tools yet at our facility to do it. We thought we did, but it completely crashed our network. Right. That shot, because all these pieces of it flying around it, circling. It was all sand, and it's built from the sand, so the sand's all flying around it, and it just destroyed our systems. Just grinded everything to a halt. And so,
were you still using Max at the time, or what were you guys using?
No, that was in Maya. He had been doing that one in Maya. We had moved on to Maya at that point.
Right.
But we just didn't have a big enough render farm, a fast enough system. So it was just killing everything. And at the time, I think that's when we were starting to work on a bunch of those shots from Day After Tomorrow too. Was building up. We had a supervisor on Day After Tomorrow, working on that show, but we couldn't get the shot done, and we didn't know if we were going to get it done. And Guillermo's freaking out and yelling at me daily, and so it was all hands on deck. You just had everybody coming in to try and help us get this shot done, and everybody was taking a piece, and we were just trying to do everything. Even Ellen Poon, who's a friend from ILM, she came in and was helping us out to do stuff. So it was just getting everybody in there just to get this one shot done. And literally, I didn't leave the office for 4 days, and I didn't sleep for 3 of them, just trying to get this shot out. And we eventually got out. It eventually looked good. And but it was painful. So LF19 is my shot that you will never forget.
Yep.
But crazy time. And I remember afterwards going home. I hadn't slept in 3 days, and I go home and I go into my back porch, which is just like steps with rocks and concrete,
Sure.
On it. And I had this mutt lab, and he was laying next to me, and I just laid my head on him and passed out for like 5 hours, just as my dog is my pillow on rocks and concrete.
Wow.
Just in the sun. I was just dead. And I woke up to the producer at our facility, Jody Etchgary. He calls me with our CEO and says, you need to come in. This was Sunday. He's like, you need to come in on Monday and start overseeing day after tomorrow, because we're having issues. I was like, I haven't slept in 3 days. This was a death march, the show we were just on.
Right.
And I'm like, I can't do it. There's no way. And they kept on talking to me, and they're like, this is your company. You have to do it. And finally I was like, fine, I'll be there Monday, but I'm not coming in early.
Right.
But and then went straight on a day after tomorrow after that, and oversaw finishing that, which, all those shows they're so hard. You're working so hard, and that was back in the days when everybody put in so many hours.
Yep.
And it was just a grind. And
you guys are working on the helicopter crash sequence, is that right? Or
we did the helicopter crash sequence, yeah. And then we also did the big storm.
Yep.
Work as well, where you saw the
eye of the storm.
Yeah. Which Stu was kind of helping them figure out how to get that. It was funny, because everybody kept on trying to do it CG, and then we were saying in our group, and then when Stu and I came on, we're like, no, let's do some practical things to make this look good. And that's when we really got that going, was we would start photographing different things and incorporating it.
Right.
And then Stu was helping that, and I basically, then we split up, and I helped out with the crash sequence. But even to the point where we were outputting our last day, and there were problems with comps. So myself and Ben Grossman, we were, who was the comp soup on the show.
Right.
We set up 2 desks side by side, and we just started recomping all the shots as they were coming through, and fixing all these shots, and just compositing. It was just he and I at 3 a.m. just cranking out shots. Wow. Trying to get them done next to each other. And it was crazy. It was fun though. It was fun. I mean, crazy, but fun and stressful, but, yeah. And then, so that was day after tomorrow. We finished that. And then, God, I don't know directly what we did after day after tomorrow. I know the first show I was ever the sole supervisor on the show was a little horror film called Jeepers Creepers 2.
Right.
Which was really fun and entertaining to do. That one was crazy because we were shooting. Ryan Tudhope had gone with me, and we were in the Grapevine at T Home Ranch. If you've ever driven up there from LA to San Francisco, and it was the middle of summer, so it was June. It was, but we were shooting all nights because it's a horror movie,
mm-hmm.
and so we would shoot all night. And it would get freezing up there shooting all night. And then we'd go back to sleep we were just staying at the Flying J, which is right off the freeway.
Yep.
There.
It's a truck stop, basically.
Yeah, pretty much. And it was so cheap. Ryan and I shared a room, but it was so fucking hot. It was so hot during the day, and we're trying to sleep, and the sun's blazing in there, and we would have to race. And then we'd get up before we were going to go shoot that night, and Ryan and I would drive. It was like, I don't know, 20, 30 minutes to basically where Universal Studios, whatever the park is there.
Mm-hmm.
And because there was a Kinko's that had Wi-Fi. or in internet, so we could go there and then we would review shots and pass files and look at stuff, and then come back and then shoot that night and show stuff to the director. But
Wow.
yeah, it was just crazy. We'd just go there each day just so we had some internet and come back, and it was all nuts.
That's
It was
crazy.
all nuts.
That's crazy.
Yeah. But yeah, then moving along at the Orphanage, one of the last shows we did there was Iron Man, first Iron Man, which was one of those shows that was extremely painful but extremely rewarding.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a tough show. I mean, we were doing Iron Man shots and ILM was doing Iron Man shots, and it was and so we were side by side with ILM on our Iron Man shots. And what had happened was everybody who wanted to work on an Iron Man shot for it had to do a test. So we did a test, ILM did a test, DD did a test, everybody did a test. And they wanted him flying and they wanted him shooting. And so everybody had done these little tests, and me being obsessed with the way it was, I wanted to do a little story, a little short. So we storyboarded out a little short, and it was this short of him flying, and he gets shot down by a tank, and then he crashes into the ground, and then the tank's going to shoot at him, and he shoots the tank and it blows up, and he walks away. And that was going to be our test.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we ended up doing at our test. And Jon Favreau just thought it was amazing and loved it, and wanted us in the show. He said, "In the sequence I want you to do is I want to make this sequence part of the movie." And that became that became ultimately the sequence we worked on, but was in that amongst some other stuff. That was the Iron Man sequence we worked on, though. The Golmero sequence.
Mm-hmm.
But it was originated from the test we did.
Right.
So that was crazy because, it was the first time we were really doing that type of work, and it was hard. And, and we were, again, side by side with ILM, so that'd be good. And it was just, and, Marvel was difficult then.
That's the first Marvel film, really.
Yeah, and everybody wanted on it, so they really, they push you down on prices, and they push you on time, and they had you wait and all that stuff. So it was tough. It was
right.
Like I said, it was the most painful show I've ever worked on, but also extremely rewarding because I'm really proud of the work we did. Because also what I got to do on the show is we were tasked with doing all the graphics for in the house.
Okay.
That happened in the house. And then at one point, John Nelson was showing me the images they had where they're trying to figure out what they're going to do inside the Iron Man helmet
mm-hmm.
and how that's going to look. And they had showed me an image. It was of Dave from 2001 when he's got you see the reflection of all of the graphics on him.
Right.
Yeah. So he's like, yeah, we're trying to figure out maybe it reflects on him or whatever, but he's in the helmet. But we want to see his POV of the graphics because he's dealing with the computer. And we were trying to find out, well, the helmet's really tight. So is it his POV? Are you seeing it? It was a difficult design problem. And, and so I said, if I could, can I take a whack at it? And so what, and I'm a big fan of anime, mm-hmm. And so I had seen Appleseed, which I used as, the basis of the look of Appleseed, where they're in these machines, but there's a lot of space around, but they have all these graphics going around them.
Right.
And so, so that was kind of the impetus for what we did in the Iron Man helmet. And then we did a test, we just filmed it. We had filmed a guy, and then we did these more basic graphics around, but basically one shot where he targets something. And then, and they loved it. So we ended up doing all of the in-helmet work, which was a massive amount of work that had then got added to our workload. And we ended up doing it all in 3D in Nuke. so it could be interactive. And so another one that just grinded our network to just nothing.
Yeah.
It was it was.
But that established a look for the rest of everything that they have.
Yeah, like I said, rewarding, painful but rewarding.
Right.
You know.
Yeah.
So it was hard. It was fun, but it was hard. And yeah, the working in Nuke doing that, it was just Nuke was not really that designed for 3D at the time.
Mhm.
So we were really, because we were just doing lines more or less around everything. It was all graphics, but it just, Nuke was just suffering under it.
Right.
And then one of the guys who worked with us, who'd been working with us forever, Dav Rosh, who's a designer, he and I kind of would work together, but he had built all of the graphics and the stories that we were trying to tell with the graphics. And, you know, there was a lot of, you know, bringing things forward and bringing things back. And, you know, and then I had gone to stage with John Nelson, and we had shot Robert Downey Jr. We just shot him in front of, you know, green, and I'd set up a bunch of lights so while he's talking, I could have him look and see lights flash back at him as he's talking, and most importantly, reflect in his eyes. And then we used, so that's how we built his head in there, and then we would use that to build up all the interactivity and everything else that was going on. It was a lot of design and trying to see where it faded off, and you know, how much depth was on it, all that sort of stuff. All the design issues you go into that are way more complex than you think it is when you're just watching it go by.
Sure.
You know. Yeah.
Sure.
We had this book, we had this binder that was like this thick of every shot and every story that needed to be told in every shot and what each thing was going to do. And we had it written down, and then we had to draw it out. And it was a lot of storytelling to figure that out, which was fun, but it was also, it was a lot.
That's a lot.
We were grinding on it. Yeah. It was great, but
really.
it was, like I said, rewarding, but really painful.
And that was the last thing you guys did at the orphanage?
One of the last, we were finishing up Hero, and Hero was really the last show we did.
Okay.
But what was happening at the time was that was when Canada was starting to do all their Canadian tax incentives.
Yep.
And so it was really pressing our budgets down, and it was becoming really difficult. And so much that we even built a Canadian facility for a while that we used on Live Free Die Hard.
Okay.
And they had done the elevator sequence up in Canada and Vancouver, and then we had done all the jet work and the freeway collapsing down in San Francisco.
Mm-hmm.
So we tried to make it work in Canada, but ultimately we couldn't either. It just wasn't going to work.
Right.
It was just too much for the studio our size anyway. So yeah, in 2010, we decided there was just no way we were going to make it happen. And fortunately, at the same time, Image Movers Digital, IMD,
Mm-hmm.
was starting up. And so they were able to take a large amount of employees. At the time, it was painful to see it happening, but they were able to ingest a lot of the artists that we had there. So nobody was, or not nobody, but those artists weren't left out in the cold, you know.
Sure.
For us closing down. But it was hard because everybody there was my friends.
Right.
You know, and I loved everyone there, and we were working hard. And the last week, basically, everybody helped out working for free just to get the last shots out because we were done. But we just needed to get those shots out for the show. So it was, and everybody got on board. It was great. It was a family. It really was. That time at the orphanage was probably, you know, one of my greatest times in the industry, because it really was a family atmosphere, and everybody just loved being there, loved working together. You know, the standard was extremely high for everything. People were just innovating all the time on the tools because they were, you know, we were one of the really early off-the-shelf software companies, you know, and we still had, you know, generalists. We were like, we're going to go with generalists, and we're going to go off the shelf.
Right.
That's how we did it. It was a lot of fun. It was great. I'm so thankful that happened in my life. It was great.
Yeah.
But it was also okay when it was done.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
Yeah.
I feel that you should feel vindicated because generalists are back in a big way.
Yeah.
And it's definitely something that I think is great that, your talent as an artist can be, start to finish, right? Not just
Yeah.
feeling like you're part of a pipeline. That's not as
Yeah,
rewarding.
absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and you just, all your love goes into those shots, every detail, and it's you, and you're just proud of it. And
Right.
it's great. So, um, yeah, I'm a big fan, of it for sure. And even now when we work on the films I supervise now, I always try to have an in-house team that has at least a 3D artist and then compositors and whatnot, because
Sure.
I just love the idea of generalists being able to just crank on stuff.
Sure.
Um, but yeah, so anyway, so in 2010 we shut down the orphanage, and then the first gig I ever did out on my own was that old producer Jody Etchgary, who made me work on Day After Tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
He was now one of the producers on Avatar.
Mm.
Yeah, and they needed to design all of their screens for on Avatar, and they were all these curved screens that were supposed to have multiple depths to them and all this stuff, and they had all sorts of design problems with that. On, do you see the backside, and what happens on the angles, and then of course what does that look like? So they ended up asking me to come on, and then I brought out a design team, and I worked again with Davrash, and we designed all the screens for Avatar. We did that, which was actually an amazing job because for those who were around during that time, Avatar was a brutal show for people working on it. It was going on for years, and people were working their asses off on it. And you would see. It reminds me that the two times I've seen this is when they were doing, I think it was Matrix Reloaded. It was Matrix 2 or 3, I can't remember.
Sure.
And we were going to go and we were going to help out on Matrix. We were trying to get an opportunity to help out on Matrix. And we went in there with John Gata to talk to them. And you walked through the halls of ESC, which is the company doing all the work. And first of all the halls were lined with boxes of servers. Like there were so many servers coming into that place every day that they didn't know what to do with it all. So they were just stacked in the halls.
Right.
And then you would see the people walking there, and it literally looked like you were watching The Walking Dead. I mean, people were just, their eyeballs were dark and sunk in, and they were just kind of walking around dazed, and just people just never went home. And it was just, they were all dying working there. It was just brutal. And it was similar to what you saw on the people who were working on Avatar.
Right.
It was kind of a similar look. So, but yeah, but what was great about it was, so we got on, we designed all of the motion graphics and the look of how all that was going to work on the screens. And then we did like 3 shots and came up with a system and how it was going to operate, and a systematic composite and all that. And then we wrote a book and handed it off to the visual effects facilities. And so we got to design it all, show a proof of concept, and then walk away. Which, for those of you who worked in visual effects, that is the best thing you could ever do.
Yeah.
Here's
how it looks. Good luck.
Yeah. All the fun without any of the pain,
right.
So, it was cool. I got to sit with James Cameron and talk through the shots, and that was amazing. And, there was saying that, everybody on that show who dealt with Jim had probably gotten bit at one time or another.
Mm-hmm.
And that was another. I was like, I went out of that movie unscathed, but I think the only reason is I just didn't work on it long enough to get caught,
I hear
So, but it was super fun. It was just being able to do all that design and just have a great time with it, and then be able to just turn it in was just amazing.
Yeah.
So did that, and then the next film I worked on was Priest with Scott Stuart, who was my partner, but then started directing,
Mm-hmm.
and then so I was the show soup on his first. Actually, it was his second film. But
so you must have worked with Rob Niederhorst. I think he was working on that too.
Oh yeah, Rob's great.
Yeah,
I love Rob.
Yeah, well, you guys get you got some commonality with John Wick as well, because he was the soup on John Wick 3, right?
Yeah, I introduced him to Chad.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, because when I was talking about it to Chad and helping him for what was it 3, and kind of working out how to do the glass room.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really cool. We had set up on stage, taped out the whole space, and then you could put on VR glasses and move throughout the space that we had built a CG version.
That was with Alex Nice you were working with, right?
Yes. Yeah, he's great. So, but I couldn't work on the show because I was on another film at the time, Predator, and so I recommended Rob, and that it was great.
Perfect.
Loved them, and they did a fantastic job. So it was cool.
Awesome.
But yeah, so that I've been doing, show side supervising ever since.
Yeah,
and it's an awesome, early on my big thing was I've gone from we had shut the Orphanage. I started my own company to manage myself for when I started doing feature side, and I had always said I went from a company of 150 to 1,
right?
Which was great, because when you start having a company and it starts getting bigger, you end up spending more time managing people than you do actually doing the work.
Sure.
And I started becoming very sad that I was spending all my time managing people.
Yeah.
One of the saddest days was when we got big enough where we needed an HR department. I was like, oh my God, we're just too big now. But yeah, so that was incredible. Just going from overseeing all those people and worrying about all those problems to just being focused on myself and the movie and nothing else. And to me, it was like a kid in a candy store. I just got so energized by the process and all the way through. It was just so cool to be on now. Because when you work, and I'm sure you know this, but when you work at a visual effects studio and you're just an artist at a visual effects studio, a lot of the creative opportunity is taken away from you, right? You're just managing a shot, and you put your own love in each shot to make it great, but it's the VFX supervisor at the studio that's giving you all your notes, and then that goes on to the show side VFX supervisor who's giving you all notes, and the look of it was designed by the art department that it happened long before you ever even were in post. And so a lot of that design and storytelling is taken away from you as an artist, and even as a show side supervisor, you get closer to it, but you're just kind of eking closer to it. And I've always loved that creative side of the process.
Right.
So once I got to be on the studio side and I was designing creatures and designing action, and because we were figuring out how they were going to interact, and you're designing the looks of environments, and then coming up with the ways how we were going to be able to film it to be able to do the work and have it interact with everything else. I just loved it. I just loved it. And then I loved, I always say that, being a show side soup, you kind of have 3 jobs. Your first job is in prep, and then you do another job that's while you're shooting, and then you have another job in post, and they're all very different from one another.
Right.
When you're in prep, it's all designed, either the design of looks or the design of how are you going to mix what you do with the practical teams, and interfacing with the DP and the stunt guys and the production designer. And I just love that process of figuring out how everything's going to work and how it's going to look and how you're going to make it look real. My big things as a soup is I love to make things look completely photoreal, and the best things you could ever say to me is either A, how did they do that? Or B, I didn't even realize I was a visual effects.
Right.
That's
a good way to put it. I mean, I've always loved if they don't know you've been there, then you've succeeded. And that's,
absolutely.
But if that's another one, is how did the hell did they do that is also an amazing thing to think about.
Yeah, those are my favorite things. We had done a shot. Sorry, I'm jumping around. We had done a shot on Superman Returns, where it's the end of the movie, and basically Superman is in a hospital. He's gone to the hospital, and what happens is it's a oneer where you follow this nurse running down the corridor, and then she runs into the room, and Superman's gone, but the bed's there, and then the camera pushes over the bed out the window, and you look down the street, which was in Sydney, but we made to be New York, and then you push in on that, and as you're pushing in, it fades into Lois Lane's office, but the different pieces of New York become different parts of her office geometrically. Wow. So we had to line up and build buildings and the moon and things like that, which then became bookcases and cabinets and a desk and her light in her office. But to do it was crazy because we're like, how the hell are we going to do this shot? So we had to come up because they used a steady cam to bring us into the room, which we then switched over to a motion control machine, which had to go over the bed, and we had to do it a couple times with the bed there, with the bed not there, and all these passes, which then took us to a dolly that took us out to the window, which then took us to a crane that pushed us down the street, which then faded into a dolly, which was going down her in her office, in her house.
Wow.
So we had to figure out how to blend all of that happening while doing all the design elements that go with it. It was just one of those shots that you watch it, you have no idea that all that was going on in the course of doing that shot, as long as we're doing it right.
Right.
But it was one of those ones just like extremely complex, even though it looks really simple at the end. Because in the movie, you run down with her, and then the camera goes over the bed, and you push down the thing, and it's there. But yeah, it was. So that was a fun one, and just trying to work out an extremely complex thing that you just would never realize it was like that. So I just I get jazzed about that kind of stuff.
That's awesome.
It definitely accesses the part of my brain that I get excited about. But yeah, so you do all that work in prep, where you're figuring it all out, and this, the stunt guys are doing the stunts, and they're like, but how are we gonna do this? And then because you're gonna fight a CG creature or whatever, and then when you start shooting, everyday shooting is a thing,
Right.
Everyday shooting is a day of problems, and I've always said, you plan as much as you can, so on the day when you shoot and it all goes to shit, at least you're starting from something.
Right.
Because it will go to shit, and there's something will go wrong, and there'll be a million problems all day long.
Sure.
But it's, and then figuring out how people interact, it's just fun. So that's a whole other thing. I'm the one guy on set who's smiling every day shooting. I just love being out there. I love doing it. When we were shooting the last John Wick, and I think I might even mention it was, we shot 90 days of nights, and we shot 13 straight weeks of nights, and It was freezing cold and raining on us all the time, and there were two people on set that were smiling. It was me and Chad Stahelski. Everybody else was miserable.
That's amazing. Well, that's cool. We've gone for a while, which is awesome. But I do want to ask you. I mean, we obviously talked about John Wick 4, which happened more recently. But what were some of your favorite shows that you souped during that time when you were doing on-set soups and
on set?
Yeah.
My three favorite shows, I would say, which I've been lucky because I haven't done that many shows necessarily. Right. I tend to work. I have a family up here in San Francisco, so my kind of deal with my wife was I'll work on a movie, and then I have to take 6 months to a year off between movies. Right. So to be with the family. But I would say the first one I really loved that I had a great time doing was After Earth, actually. That was an amazing show. And that's where I met Chad Stahelski, who is the second director on it. But we went to all these incredible places. We were in Eureka, and then and we were in Costa Rica, and we were in Moab, Utah, and we were in Switzerland and the Alps, and then I was in Iceland shooting, and so we were just all over the place. It was amazing, and that movie everybody wanted to have a good time on that movie. That was probably the most fun party movie I've ever been involved in. And M. Night Shyamalan, everybody doesn't call him Night.
Right.
Night would do this amazing thing when we were in Philly. Like he just cared about his crew, and he just wanted everybody to have a good time. And if you've ever worked on a movie, a lot of times on Fridays they do this thing where everybody puts money in a pool, and different departments do, and then somebody wins the pot at the on
$5 Friday.
Exactly, you know it exactly.
Yep.
But when we were in Philly shooting, Night changed $5 Friday to every Friday he would give away these crazy trips.
Wow.
He would give trips to like Italy or the Seychelles, or I mean, just all like
That's
serious,
insane,
huge trips, and he would give one away every week. And it was $5 Friday, but what you won was these insane trips that Night would put out there. And we had a wrap party after every location, which that's a guy who likes to have wrap parties.
Yeah.
And then also Will Smith is just one of the nicest, wonderful people I've ever worked with. He's just a great, just love Will Smith. So I just loved that experience with him. And Night was great to work with. So it was a great show. And Chad, and when I went to Iceland, it was the weirdest thing. Sorry, I'm answering your question a long way here.
It's okay.
I flew out there with the line producer, and we were in Iceland. We had these 2 shots we just had to do in Iceland, and we were and Oblivion was shooting up there.
Yeah, I worked on that.
Oh, did you? Yeah. So
I think a lot of things were happening in Iceland at that time. There were helicopters flying for it, because Prometheus was also happening at that time as well, and they were shooting up there.
I think they were getting going. Yeah, it was nuts. And so my producer had worked out that we were going to borrow the helicopter because they were using the same Sony camera we were.
Yep. And the F-65, right?
Yes, exactly. You know. And so that's funny. And so we were going to borrow the helicopter in the F-65, and but they didn't know what day we were going to get it.
Sure.
Because they were using it on the show. So we basically just hung around in Iceland for a week waiting to use the camera.
Mm-hmm.
And the first scout day was awesome because we flew all over Iceland in the helicopter looking for spots to shoot. But also, that's another part of prep I love, is scouting. It's the coolest thing ever.
Yeah.
But the helicopter guy's like, do you mind if we go? We want to do a kind of a little pre-run through for this shot, this sequence we need to do for the movie, for their movie. So I was like, okay, sure, for Oblivion. So it was the sequence where they're flying through the canyons.
Yes.
Being chased. So they take me down. We start flying through all these canyons in the helicopter for my scout day. I'm like, this is amazing. It's so cool. Just so lucky.
Yeah.
And then we just kind of hung out, and I met Eric Barba because we were just sitting on I was just sitting on the set every day.
Right.
And I just started asking him questions because I didn't have it. For those of you who have been on a set, if you're not working, it's boring.
Right.
You're sitting around a lot.
Yeah.
So I started talking to Eric, and after I was like, who are you? Why are you here? So then I got to know Eric, because I just, every day I'm just sitting there on a set, just hanging out.
You're not even on the same movie. It's kind of funny.
No, not even the movie. It's just there. He's like, why are you here? Who are you?
That's funny. That's funny.
Yeah, but then we got to go to Switzerland, and that's where and it was just myself and Chad and our team, because we were having guys in squirrel suits fly next to the Eiger, because we needed these shots next to the mountains. So, and we had one guy who was just free flying, and another guy who was going with, actually, we attached a camera to his chest.
Right.
And which we had to find a light camera that he could actually fly with. It was all this technical issues with that, but we managed to figure it out. And we would, so we would just, they would do these jumps, and we would just line up, and we'd have to wait. They were so high up, and it's funny, you look at that mountain and you don't realize how big it is.
Right.
And because we would be down on the bases, we were just on the side of this Swiss hill waiting for him, which was our landing, right near our landing site. And we couldn't do anything, because you would even look up and you'd use binoculars. They'd drop them from a helicopter, and then so they could pick up speed and be along the mountainside. And you take binoculars out to go look at them, and you think, oh, okay, so they're going to get bigger. They were still a speck going across the side of the mountain. It was incredible.
Wow.
But then so Chad and myself and this guy Kwame, who was the producer, we would just sit there and drink cappuccinos while we were waiting for him on this little cafe on the side of the hill. And we would just get jacked on caffeine waiting for these guys to come down. And they come down like, whoa, look at the marriage, we want to see it. But yeah, so that's fun. That show was fun.
Yeah. Awesome.
And then the last day of shooting, Chad decides the local guys invited us to go on a hike to go get some coffee. This little day hike, he called it.
Okay.
Well, it was 7,000 vertical feet of hike. I mean, it was insane. Chad and I didn't know if we were going to make it. I mean, our legs were fried. Going down, I thought my legs were going to drop out of me.
Right.
Because it was so high up. And the worst part was we get to near the top, and you get to near the top, and then there's this winding path to go up to this little house that's been there. I guess Churchill had been there, had stayed there. This little tiny place, and we're just dying. We've been hiking for all day to get up there,
sure.
and finally it's the last bit, and we're exhausted, and we've gone from beautiful to now it's snow up there, and all of a sudden I see like these old people walking up there and these kids walking up there. I was like, what the hell? All these people did this hike. Am I really in that bad a shape?
Right.
And the guy's like, oh no, there's a tram that takes you right here. So, God, so mad.
You could have just taken a tram the whole time.
Taking the tram up there. I was like, you bastard.
That's funny.
But yeah, so we were just dead. But it was fun. That was fun. And then but that was after. It was a great show, and host had a great time.
Sure.
And then my next favorite show was Deadpool. Was incredible.
Yeah.
And Deadpool all the way through was nobody knew who we were. Nobody had people. I tell them Deadpool, and they thought we were doing a remake of the old Clint Eastwood movie.
Yeah. Tim's been on a couple times on the show, and so I know his history with that and the passion he has with that project, and it was really kind of amazing, and especially at that time because it was low budget for something like that. Right?
Oh yeah, we were low budget.
Yeah,
we were low budget for sure. They it was amazing because they didn't want to give us any money, but I love Tim. Mm-hmm. Tim's amazing.
Yep.
And he wrote a script and designed costumes and designed shots to match his budget.
Yeah,
like he knew what he was doing, and he was going to work towards it. And anytime the studio came back, he was like, I'm shooting the script that you approved, that you said it was okay, and I'm doing it in the budget that you said you gave me. Right. So the only time we went over budget was Tim and I had wanted his face to move because the way the mask is, it's a solid mask.
Yes.
And even the head is a shell so that it holds that Deadpool shape. Right. So at the time, Fox didn't want it. They're like, we don't need his face to move. And I'm like, you've got Ryan Reynolds.
Right.
And he's behind a mask the whole time. I dealt with this on Iron Man. You're going to want to see his face.
Right.
If you're not going to see his face, you're going to want to see it move, you know? But at the time, Fox didn't know what movie they had. Right. So they were like, no. But I was sure we were going to do it. So I talked to Tim, and we did a test where I filmed Ryan acting, and then filmed him with the Deadpool mask on, mm-hmm. and then we basically did a 2D 3D blend to move the face shapes around.
Yeah, especially the eyes were the big ones, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. It was all about the eyes.
Right.
And then once we did that, once they saw the movie and realized they had a fucking incredible movie on their hands,
right?
And we showed them the eye test. They're like, okay, we get it. And they so they found the money for us to do it.
Yep.
And what was so cool about that movie was that everybody wanted to be on that movie, which is one of those movies where everybody wanted to be on it. Yeah. So we actually got away with having Weta do all of the face mask work for the movie. Yeah, which was, I'm like, really? Weta's going to do this? Like, they want to do it. I'm like, okay. And and the thing I told him though, it was like, I'm like, no CG heads. I had no time want to replace his head. Everything's got to be real. So what we did was we shot it, and then we had them paint out the spec, the highlights, so that when they reanimated it, the only thing we put back on there, the animation was done 2D 3D, so they just push pixels around to have the motion on the mask, but then we rendered a spec and reflection pass to go back onto it, so that would move with it. So that was the only thing we comped back on, was the spec and reflection. Yeah, and it was a way to A, keep the cost down, and B, we just did not want to replace his head. We wanted to be the actual mask and everything else, as practical as possible. So yeah, that show, it was just a crazy show. Again, everybody was in together. I would go out with cast and crew, and Ken sang. We would go out all the time and drink at our place, and it was so much fun. And Tim was just figuring out as he went. So it was
that's his first movie.
Yeah, that's his first one.
It's a pretty good first start. It's a pretty amazing thing. But he'd been working on this for a while. Is it true, by the way, that the title sequence was also something that was kind of added later, like as far as right?
Definitely,
right?
Definitely,
yeah.
That one almost broke Blur. I mean,
I remember that. I was at Chaos at the time, but I remember them working on that and speaking to people like Kevin Margot and stuff. I'm like, oh my God, because they did all those titles as they did the names as a joke because they didn't have the real titles yet, or the real things.
Yes.
And they kept that, right? So a similar story to what you were talking about earlier, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, I know that's all over that movie for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was crazy because they were just doing it, but they're a gaming company, right?
Yeah.
So when they had to move up to film res, it was a painful transition for them in terms of their, and I would walk around that, and that was where we were posting at. Like we posted out of Blur, so we were there all the time. But the VFX crew at Blur, I think, kind of hated me, but because it was hard, and they were matching the DD shots of that we did for Colossus, and it's hard, and it's hard to make that transition.
And then Atomic Fiction did a bunch of stuff too, right? So that was Kevin.
Yeah,
that was Kevin.
That was Kevin, exactly. Kevin and Ryan.
So we're all just small in this. We're such a small.
Yeah, Ryan was my soup on it.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, the thing is, and then DD, who was our main vendor, I had Alex Wong be my supervisor on it. That was that was his first job as a supervisor, but I trusted Alex so much and knew how talented he was because he worked for me at the Orphanage. That I insisted that if DD was going to be on it, that I wanted Alex on the show.
Yeah, he's been on this podcast. He was on right after he did Last of Us stuff because he was the super.
Oh yeah. Alex is awesome. I love Alex.
Such a nice guy.
And so talented, so talented, and so sweet. Such a nice guy.
For sure.
Yeah, one of my favorite people.
Yeah.
So I was lucky because it was one of those opportunities where I got to pick all the people working on the show, and they were all people I trusted. So I knew I could. The other company that was Rodeo and Wayne Britton was on that one, and Wayne was awesome too. So everybody just did such an incredible job on that show, and so it's like I was working with my friends, and we were doing this cool thing that nobody knew what it was, but everybody was going to go crazy over it, and it was so different and fun and unique at the time. It was really cool.
That's awesome.
So that was one, and the last one I'll say was John Wick 4.
Yeah.
I mean,
I can't imagine why it wouldn't be. I mean, having heard that story that you told on the previous episode, that's incredible.
Yeah, it was great, and I look up to Chad, and I think he's just one of the most incredible directors I've ever worked with. He's just so intelligent, people don't realize all the artistic references and all the things that are going into these John Wick movies that are just super subtle and in there. But he thinks about all that stuff all the time, and he's so involved in every aspect of that movie in a way that I just haven't seen other directors just take on. I mean, to the point where the costume design, he he wasn't getting what he wanted, so he went on the internet and just started designing, giving all the information of designing the costumes because it's what he wanted to have. And
Amazing.
Yeah, he's just, and every knife and every little detail that, which directors do, but
Sure.
he definitely is on steroids for
sure.
sure.
Well, listen, this has been an amazing journey. So many great stories. I also love the fact that we cross paths in many different weird ways that we've never actually met. So, but it's really, really cool to hear that, Jonathan. And I love these stories, and love to stay in touch with you, and hear your next great adventure. And actually, I'd love to tell you some of the cool stuff we're doing as well, and see what you're up to as well. So, but thank you so much, man. These are such great stories. I know we've gone a little long. We had a little bit of technical issues to get this off the road, but in the end, we've got this incredible story. So thank you so much, man.
Oh, my pleasure. This is fun, for sure. I'm not usually one who talks about myself, so it's a little weird, but
yeah, but I got it out of you.
yeah.
Got it out of you. Perfect. Thanks, man.
Yeah. All right. Thanks a lot. I appreciate it, Chris.